The gate to the south field had not moved in 3 years. Clarence Lockhart knew that without looking. He knew it the way a man knows the position of a scar on his own body, by feel, by weight, by the dull, persistent ache of something that has not healed and does not intend to. He was standing at the fence line with the morning sun cutting hard across his shoulders when Delia Covington walked up behind him and said the words that would change everything. "I want to plant the south field." He turned around slowly, the way a man turns when he is buying himself time, when something has reached into his chest and grabbed something that was not supposed to be touched. She was standing there with her arms loose at her sides and her dark eyes steady, not apologetic, not tentative, just stating a fact, just offering something. "No," he said. "I have the seed," she said. "Winter wheat. It will establish before the first hard frost if we start within the week. The soil in that field is deep and dark. You have been letting the best ground on this property go to grief." The word hit him like a slap. Grief. She had said it out loud, the word he had not spoken in 3 years, the word that sat at the center of everything he did not do, every fence he did not mend, every field he did not open. Every morning he woke before dawn and walked to the edge of that south fence and stood there and walked away. "You do not know what you are asking," he said. "I know exactly what I am asking," Delia Covington said. "And I think somewhere underneath all that silence, you know that Meredith would have planted it herself by now." Clarence Lockhart went absolutely still. The name. She had said the name. Nobody on this property said that name. His foreman knew better. The 2 ranch hands he employed knew better. Even his mother, when she wrote letters from San Antonio, worked carefully around it like a river working around a stone. And this woman, this stranger who had arrived on his property 6 weeks ago with a surveyor's kit and a letter of recommendation from the county land office, had just said it like it was something ordinary, like it was something that could be spoken in open air without the sky cracking apart. He thought he was going to say something sharp and cutting. He thought he was going to tell her to pack her things. Instead, what came out of his mouth, low and rough and astonishing even to himself, was, "Yes." Just that, just yes. And even as he said it, he did not know why. 6 weeks earlier, Delia Covington had arrived at the Lockhart Ranch outside Millhaven, Texas, on a Thursday morning in late September of 1878, riding a spotted mare that she had clearly handled for years, the 2 of them moving together with the easy economy of long partnership. Clarence had been up on the barn roof patching shingles when he heard the horse coming up the track, and he had looked down from his vantage point and watched her approach with the measuring eye he gave to most things that came onto his property uninvited. She was not what he had expected. The county land office had sent word that they were dispatching a surveyor to address the boundary dispute between the Lockhart Ranch and the Reardon property to the east. Boundary disputes in Comanche County in 1878 were not gentle conversations. They were the kind of thing that ended in attorneys or gunshots, and Clarence had been bracing himself for one or the other. What he had not been bracing himself for was a woman in a practical dark riding skirt and a canvas work coat, with a leather satchel slung across her chest and a theodolite case strapped to her saddlebag. He came down from the roof with deliberate slowness and met her in the yard. "Clarence Lockhart," she said, not dismounting yet, reading the property the way a person reads a situation before committing to it. "That's right. Delia Covington, county surveyor seconded from the Austin land office. I have an assignment here regarding the eastern boundary of your property." She held out the letter without any ceremony. He took it and read it and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. "You're the surveyor," he said, not making it a question, just making sure he had understood correctly. "That is what I just said." He looked at her for a long moment. "I've seen surveyors," he said. "And now you've seen another one," she said. "Is there somewhere I can stable my horse?" That had been the beginning. Not dramatic, not particularly warm, but honest in the way that 2 capable people can be honest when they are not pretending to be something they are not. He had shown her the stable, and she had taken care of the mare herself without asking for help, efficiently and with obvious experience. He had given her the small room in the southwest corner of the bunkhouse that he used for storage, and she had thanked him without any particular feeling one way or the other. She had started work the next morning at first light. Clarence had done survey work himself in his younger years, before the ranch had become his full inheritance, and he knew enough about it to respect competence when he saw it. What Delia Covington did with that theodolite was something else entirely. She moved through the property like she was reading a language written in the land itself. She set up her instrument and took readings with a precision that was visibly extraordinary, adjusting for the slight slope in the east pasture, accounting for the iron deposits near the creek that could throw a magnetic compass sideways, working the math in her head and checking it against her notebook, and then checking it again. On the third day he found himself following her at a distance. He told himself he was checking fences. He was not checking fences. He was watching her work. She caught him at it in the late afternoon when she turned from her instrument and looked directly at him across 200 yards of open ground. She did not call out or wave. She just looked. Then she turned back to her equipment. He felt, obscurely, that he had been assessed and filed away, and that the assessment had been neither entirely favorable nor entirely dismissive. It was a feeling he was not used to. The boundary dispute with the Reardon property turned out to be more complicated than the county had represented. The original survey from 1861 had been conducted by a man named Hollis, who had used a methodology that even at the time had been considered somewhat imprecise, and the corner markers he had placed did not correspond with any of the natural landmarks he had described in his notes. 2 of the markers had been moved. Delia suspected this within her first week and confirmed it within 10 days. She presented her findings to Clarence at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening, spreading her field notes and her redrawn plat across the oilcloth, and walking him through her conclusions with the methodical precision of someone who expected to be challenged and had prepared for every possible challenge. The lamp burned yellow between them. Outside, the coyotes were starting up in the near dark. Hollis's original northeast corner was here, she said, putting her finger on a point on the plat. The current marker is 47 feet east of where it should be. Whoever moved it was trying to claim a strip of land approximately 12 feet wide, running the full length of your eastern fence. In terms of acreage, it is not large. In terms of principle, it is not small. Reardon, Clarence said, I cannot tell you who moved it. I can tell you when it was moved, roughly, based on the weathering of the new placement versus the original displacement marks in the ground. It was moved sometime in the last 4 years. Clarence thought about that. Margaret Reardon, who ran the property now, had inherited it from her father 3 years ago. Before that it had been Fletcher Reardon, who was the kind of man who thought that a fence was merely a starting position in a longer negotiation. Fletcher, he said. That would be consistent with the timeline, Delia said. Do you want me to file a formal survey correction with the county? Yes, he said. He was looking at her plat, which was beautiful in a spare and functional way, every line clean, every notation precise. Where did you learn to survey? He asked. She was quiet for a moment, rolling her pencil between her fingers. My father, she said. He was the county surveyor for Travis County for 20 years. He taught me everything he knew because I was the only one of his children who was interested, and because he believed that a useful skill is a useful skill regardless of who holds it. And the Austin Land Office hired you. After considerable resistance, she said, with a flatness in her voice that contained a great deal she was not elaborating on. They hired me because I am demonstrably better at this than anyone else they had available. That is the only reason they hired me, and it is the only reason I need. Clarence looked up from the plat and looked at her. The lamplight was doing something to her face, catching the intensity in her dark eyes, the set of her jaw that spoke of a person who had learned to take up space in rooms that had not been built for her. He felt something shift in his chest that he did not want to examine. "Fair enough," he said. She stayed on through October. The formal survey correction required additional fieldwork, additional calculations, additional documentation, and then there was the matter of filing with the county clerk and the question of whether Margaret Reardon would contest the finding, which she initially said she would, and then, when Delia's documentation was presented in its complete and unanswerable form, abruptly decided she would not. The strip of land came back to the Lockhart property. No gunshots, no attorneys, just mathematics. During those weeks, something was happening between Clarence and Delia that neither of them named, because naming things requires a certain kind of courage that both of them were short of, though for different reasons. They ate dinner together most evenings because it was efficient, and because neither of them was inclined toward ceremony. They talked about the work and then they talked about other things, and the conversations lasted longer than the work required. He told her about the ranch, about his father who had built it from dry ground and determination, about the cattle operation and the water rights, and the particular challenge of ranching in country that could go from green to dust in a single dry summer. He talked about the land with a love that he didn't really bother to conceal, because the land was something that could be loved without consequence. She listened with genuine attention, asking questions that revealed she had been thinking carefully about what he was saying. She told him about Austin, about the land office, about the surveys she had done across central Texas since the end of the war. She had been doing this for 6 years. She was 28 years old. She spoke about the work with passion and precision, the way people speak about things that have given their lives shape. What she did not talk about, he noticed, was anything personal, any history beyond the professional. He did not push because he was not in a position to push. He had his own silences. The south field was the largest silence. It was 40 acres of deep loam soil in the bottomland south of the main house, bounded by the creek on the west and the ridge on the east. In 1875, the year after he and Meredith had married, they had planted it together in winter wheat. It had been her idea. She had grown up on a grain farm in central Kansas, and she had looked at that south field with the eye of someone who recognized good soil when she stood on it. And she had said, "This is wheat ground, Clarence. This is the best wheat ground I have ever seen." And they had planted it together in the fall and watched it come up green and extraordinary in the spring, and harvested it in June with a borrowed thrashing machine and the help of half a dozen neighbors. They had planned to do it every year. Meredith had died in the winter of 1875 of a fever that came on fast and was gone in the other direction in 10 days. She was 24 years old. They had been married 14 months. He had not opened the south field since. The field gate was padlocked. He had put the lock on himself 2 days after the funeral, in the same numb, deliberate way that he had packed her clothes into a trunk and put the trunk in the back of the storage room. He did not think of it as keeping the field for her. He did not think of it in terms that he could have articulated at all. It was simply something he could not do. Some forbidden territory in himself that he did not cross and did not explain and did not apologize for. When Delia Covington asked him to plant it, she had been on the property for 6 weeks. She had walked the entire boundary of the Lockhart ranch in the course of her work, including the south edge, including the field. She had seen the deep loam. She had seen the gate with its padlock and the field going to seed and scrub behind it, and she had put things together because she was a person who put things together. He said yes before he knew why. That evening, he sat alone on the porch for a long time after she had gone in, listening to the creek and the coyotes and the particular quiet of a Texas night in late October, and he tried to understand what he had done. He had said yes to opening the field. He had said yes to letting someone else stand on ground that he had closed up 3 years ago like a wound. And the thing that was slowly, unbearably becoming clear to him was that it had not felt like a betrayal. It had felt like relief. He did not sleep well. He was up before the sun and he went to the south field gate and stood in front of it in the dark. The lock was cold under his fingers. He had the key on his ring. He did not use it, not yet. He just stood there. He heard her before he saw her. Soft footsteps in the dry grass, the sound of someone who moves with deliberate quiet rather than accidental quiet. She came up beside him without saying anything and stood there too. "You don't have to today," she said after a while. "I know, but you're going to." "I think so," he said. She put her hand on the fence post next to his, not on him, just near him. "Tell me about her," she said. He had not said Meredith's name aloud in 3 years. He had deflected and gone quiet and changed the subject and let the silence do the work of communication. Standing in the dark at the gate of the south field with Delia Covington's hand not quite touching his, he opened his mouth and found that the words were there, waiting. "She was from Kansas," he said. "She knew wheat. She could look at a handful of soil and tell you what it wanted. She laughed loud and she had opinions about everything and she was never wrong about the land." He stopped. "She was the best person I knew." Delia was quiet for a moment. "She sounds extraordinary." She was. "She would have planted this field every year," Delia said. "You know that." "Yes." "So plant it," Delia said. "Not for me, not to move on. Plant it because she was right that this is the best soil on the property and because the land doesn't know how to grieve. The land just wants to grow." He stood there in the dark and felt something in his chest crack open in a way that was painful and necessary. The way the first break of spring ice is painful and necessary, because the water underneath has to move. He took the key from his ring and opened the lock. They worked the south field together starting the next morning. This was something Delia had not been hired for, something that was far outside the scope of her assignment. But she had seed wheat in her saddlebag because she had been carrying it since September, bought from a grain merchant in Brenham when she had been passing through on another survey assignment, with some vague intention of finding useful ground for it. She had recognized the south field within her first week on the property. She had been waiting for the right moment to ask. She had not been entirely sure the moment would come. The preparation of the field required work. 3 years of neglect had allowed the scrub to establish, and the first 2 days were clearing work. She and Clarence and his foreman Billy Tate and the 2 hands, working through the field with tools and determination. Clarence worked alongside his hands rather than above them, which she had already noticed about him, that he was not the kind of rancher who directed from a distance. He was a hands-on-the-work kind of man, and it showed in the way the hands worked with him rather than merely for him. She noticed other things. She noticed the way he moved, with the easy physicality of a man who has spent his life in physical work and whose body has become perfectly calibrated to what it is asked to do. She noticed the way he looked at the field as they cleared it, something complicated moving behind his eyes, grief and something else. Something that looked like it might be the very early stages of peace. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression she could not quite categorize, but that made something small and cautious move in her chest. She was not a woman who frightened easily. She had walked into rooms full of hostile men and presented survey findings that contradicted what those men wanted to be true. And she had done it with her data and her precision and her absolute refusal to be diminished, and she had won. She had ridden alone across substantial stretches of the Texas frontier. She had argued with county clerks and land commissioners and property lawyers, and won most of those arguments too. But this feeling, this small careful movement in her chest when Clarence Lockhart looked at her, this was something she did not have a professional methodology for addressing. So she addressed it the way she addressed most things she was uncertain about. She worked. On the 4th day of field preparation, they had cleared the worst of the scrub, and she was taking measurements for the seeding plan, calculating row spacing and seed density based on the soil composition she had been assessing as they worked. She was on her knees at the edge of the field with a handful of soil, working it between her fingers, reading it with the same attention she gave to everything. Clarence came up behind her and she heard him stop. She held the soil out to him. "Come look at this," she said. He crouched down beside her, which put him very close, close enough that she could see the detail of the weathered lines around his eyes when he turned to look at what she was showing him. "See the structure," she said. "This is your horizon, the topsoil layer. 3 years of fallow has actually done something useful. The organic matter has built up. If you look at the color difference between this and what we dug out in the center of the field." She showed him the 2 soil samples she had collected, setting them side by side on a piece of canvas. "The edge samples are darker, richer. The weed growth has been cycling organic material back into the surface layer. You have even better soil now than you had in 1875. He was looking at the soil. Then he was looking at her. The expression on his face was one she had not seen there before. It was pure, uncomplicated astonishment, the way a person looks when they encounter something that exceeds what they had prepared for. "How do you know about soil horizon?" he asked. "Survey work touches land composition," she said. "And I read. And I grew up with a father who believed knowledge was something you collected everywhere you went, not just from the sources that were meant for you." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "What is it?" "Meredith used to do that," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Take a handful of soil and read it like a page." Delia Covington looked at him steadily. "Then she knew her ground," she said. "And so do I." He stood up and looked out across the south field for a long moment. When he looked back down at her, his eyes had that complicated thing in them again, but she thought she could categorize it a little better now. It was not only grief. It was not only respect. It was something that was beginning, carefully and against what she suspected were considerable internal arguments, to be something more. "I'll go get the seed drill," he said, and went. She stayed on her knees in the south field for a moment after he left, feeling the soil under her hands and trying to be honest with herself about what was happening. She had not come to the Lockhart ranch looking for anything beyond a survey assignment. She had learned, through 6 years of working in a profession that regarded her presence as an ongoing surprise to be managed rather than a contribution to be welcomed, to keep her personal life efficiently separate from her professional one. She did not have the luxury of vulnerability in most of the rooms she entered. This was not most rooms. Clarence Lockhart had never once looked at her work with anything other than respect. He had never once suggested, in word or expression, that her capability was surprising given her sex. He simply looked at what she did and gave it the credit it was owed, with the uncomplicated directness of a man who evaluated things on their actual merit. She had not realized how much she had missed being seen clearly until she was standing in the field of a grieving rancher at the edge of the Texas Hill Country, and someone was finally doing it. The seeding took 2 more days. She ran the seed drill while Clarence and the hands managed the horse teams, and she directed the row spacing and depth with the same precision she brought to everything. The field was planted by the end of October, the rows running straight and true through the 40 acres of dark loam, and then it was done, and they stood at the fence line in the late afternoon and looked at it. Billy Tate said something quietly to the hands, and the 3 of them went back toward the barn, giving the moment the privacy it required without being obvious about it, which spoke well of Billy Tate. Clarence stood at the fence with his arms along the top rail and his hat pushed back and looked at the field. Delia stood beside him, close enough that the sleeves of their coats were almost touching. "It looks right," he said. "It should come up in about 2 weeks," she said, "provided you don't get a hard freeze before then. Weather's been mild. Then you'll have green on this field by mid-November." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "I know that wasn't part of your assignment." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't. Why did you do it?" She thought about the honest answer to that question and decided she owed him the honest answer. "Because this land has been waiting," she said, "and because I thought maybe you had been too. And because," she paused, and this was the harder thing, the thing she had to look at directly and choose to say, "because I could not bear to leave without doing something that mattered here." He turned to look at her, and she kept her eyes on the field because she was not quite ready to meet his gaze when she was this exposed. "Leave," he repeated. "Your assignment is finished. "It will be finished when I file the final survey correction," she said. "That will take a few more days, and then yes." Another long quiet. The sun was getting low and the light was going gold, and the south field was sitting in it, 40 acres of planted possibility. "And if the assignment were extended," he said. His voice was very careful, very measured, the voice of a man who is choosing every word with the awareness that some words cannot be unsaid. She turned and looked at him now. He was looking back at her with that directness he had, that complete and undefended directness that she had been encountering all month and that still, each time, moved something in her. "Extended to what purpose?" she said. "The ranch has survey needs that have never been properly addressed," he said. "The water rights on the creek need documentation. The grazing permits on the north section are based on boundary descriptions that are decades old and probably wrong. A thorough survey of the full property conducted properly. He was building a professional case. She could hear it, but there was something underneath the professional case that was not professional at all, and they both knew it. It would take months. Months, she said. Through spring at least. Through spring. Through the wheat coming up in the south field and growing through November and going dormant in December, and the spring green in March and the harvest in June. He was asking her to stay for all of that. He was asking her to see the thing she had planted through to its completion. He was asking for more than that, but he was not saying more than that yet, and she understood why. "I would need to send word to the Austin office," she said. "I can pay for your time at the county rate," he said. "The water rights on the creek," she said, and she heard the faint note of amusement in her own voice. "Do they really need documentation?" The corner of his mouth moved. The first real smile she had seen on him, brief and almost involuntary, like something that had gotten out before he had managed to contain it. "They need it now more than ever," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the field. "All right," she said. "I'll send word to Austin." The weeks that followed had a quality she had not experienced before in her professional life, which was the quality of belonging somewhere. The water rights documentation was real work, and she approached it seriously, spending days walking the creek and charting its course, and measuring its flow and recording the existing usage points, and their relation to the established legal water rights of neighboring properties. It was meticulous, important work, and she was good at it, and Clarence sometimes rode out with her in the mornings, ostensibly to show her the creek features she might not find on her own. Actually, she understood, because he wanted to be there. They talked on those mornings the way people talk when they are becoming necessary to each other, with the growing ease of two people who have discovered they are compatible at the fundamental level of how they think. He asked her questions about surveying and mathematics and the science of land measurement with genuine curiosity, and she found that she could show him things about the way the land worked that she had never had a good audience for before. He absorbed information the way good ground absorbs water, completely and without waste. She asked him about ranching, about the cattle business, about the particular economics of running a beef operation in the 1870s with the railroad expanding and the markets shifting and the trailing routes being slowly replaced by the locomotive. He talked about it with both pride and clear-eyed pragmatism, the love of the work running underneath the practical analysis like the water ran under the gravel of the creek bed. One morning in early November, she found him at the south field fence before sunrise. The wheat had not come up yet. He was just standing there. She brought him a cup of coffee from the kitchen without asking, and he took it without making anything of it, and they stood together in the early cold looking at the dark field. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "What?" "When you came here, you already knew about Meredith. Somebody at the county office must have told you." She was quiet for a moment. "The clerk mentioned that the property had been in the family for some time, and that the owner had experienced a personal loss some years back." "Nothing specific, but you figured it out, the field, the padlock." "The padlock was suggestive," she said carefully. "A padlocked gate on otherwise well-maintained property. And the field was visibly the best growing ground on the ranch. The contrast was notable." You could have left it alone. Yes, she said. Why didn't you? She held her cup in both hands and thought about how to say this. Because a field that good going to waste represents a decision someone has made about what they deserve, she said. And I thought you deserved better than that decision. He turned and looked at her. The darkness was beginning to thin at the edges. His face was close and unguarded in the way it got sometimes in the early morning, before the day put its demands on him. That's a considerable presumption, he said, but he didn't say it harshly. It is, she agreed. I am sometimes guilty of considerable presumptions. Ask the county clerk. The smile appeared again, a little longer this time, a little more comfortable, like something that was learning it was allowed. I'll take your word for it, he said. They stood there drinking their coffee as the light came, and she was aware of the warmth of him standing close beside her, the solid physical presence of him, the ease of it, the way she had stopped noticing it as something remarkable and had started simply depending on it the way you depend on something that has become part of the landscape of your days. That realization made her breathe more carefully. The wheat came up on November 14th. She was at the creek doing flow measurements when Clarence came riding out to find her, which he did not normally do midday. Come see, he said. She rode back with him, and he took her to the south field, and they stood at the gate and looked at the thin green film of wheat seedlings covering 40 acres of dark soil in the bright November light, the most tender and extraordinary green she had ever seen, the green of something alive that had chosen this moment to be alive. Clarence Lockhart looked at that field and she watched his face, and what she saw there was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was not grief, not exactly, though grief was part of it. It was the face of a man who has been standing in dark water for a long time and has just felt the current shift and understood for the first time that the water is moving toward the light. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. After a while he reached over and took her hand where it rested on the fence rail and held it, and she let him, and neither of them pretended it was anything other than what it was. The first cold came in late November, sharp and early, a hard frost that glazed the ground and sent the hands to wrap the water pipes and move the young horses into the covered corral. The wheat went dormant under it, the green going gray-green and still, as winter wheat is designed to do, drawing its energy inward and waiting. Delia knew this and Clarence knew this, and still they both walked to the Southfield fence one morning after the frost and looked at it with a mutual anxiety that they each would have denied if pressed. "It's fine," she said, crouching and brushing frost off a handful of seedlings with her gloved fingers. "See how the leaves are folded rather than broken. It's hardening off." "This is what it's supposed to do. You're sure?" She looked up at him. "I'm sure," she said, with the calm confidence that was not performance but was simply how she sounded when she knew something. He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I know you are." Something in the way he said it made her look at him a beat longer. He had said it with a softness that had nothing to do with the wheat. She stood up. They were very close. The cold morning air was making their breath visible, small white clouds between them. He was looking at her with an expression that was direct and careful and full of things he had not yet said. "Delia," he said, just her name but with a weight behind it. "Clarence," she said, "I need to tell you something." "All right." "I have not," he stopped, started again. 3 years is a long time to be carrying something alone. I had decided without deciding exactly that I was going to keep carrying it alone, that it was the most honest way to honor what I'd lost. He paused. "And then you came here." She was very still. "And I have been trying to understand what has been happening to me for the past 8 weeks, he said, "and I think I understand it. I think what has been happening is that you have been," he looked for the word with the concentration he gave to hard problems, "reminding me that being alive is something that asks things of you, that you have to show up for it." "The field," she said softly. "Among other things." He was looking at her very directly. "I am not a man who says things he doesn't mean." "I know that," she said. "So when I tell you that I am," another pause, "that I think about you constantly, that I have started every morning in the last several weeks by looking forward to seeing you, and that has not been something I have had cause to say for a very long time. I want you to know that I am not saying it carelessly." Delia Covington stood in the frost-white grass beside the south field and looked at this man, and felt the considerable presumption she had made 6 weeks ago resolve into something that had been quietly true all along. She had come to plant a field, and she had planted it, and it had gone dormant in the winter cold, and it was waiting for spring. She understood, standing there, that she had also planted something in herself, and it had been waiting too. "I think about you constantly as well," she said, "in case that wasn't clear." He reached out and touched her face very gently with one cold-gloved hand. She turned her face slightly into it. "I don't want you to leave in the spring," he said. "You already asked me to stay through spring," she said. "Water rights documentation, you said. I'm asking for something different now." She looked at him. The cold air was sharp, and the south field was gray-green and dormant behind him, and the sky was the pale blue of a winter morning in the Texas hill country, and everything was very clear and very still. "Then ask clearly," she said. "I work in precise measurements. I need precise requests." The smile came again, and this time it was not brief, and it was not almost involuntary. It was full and warm and a little wondering, the smile of a man who has been given something he had stopped expecting to be given. "Stay," he said, "not for the survey. Stay because I am in love with you, and I believe you feel the same, and I want to find out what that means for both of us." She felt the warmth move through her chest and into her hands, and she thought about 6 years of walking into hostile rooms and winning arguments she should not have had to make, and riding alone across the frontier with her theodolite and her saddlebags and her fierce, quiet conviction that she was doing what she was meant to do. She thought about how she had never expected to find a place where that was not something to be managed but simply something true. "I do feel the same," she said, "and I will stay." He took her hand properly then, both of his around both of hers, and she let the cold and the quiet and the dormant field hold them both for a moment before the rest of the morning required their attention. December came in with a steady cold that turned the hill country stark and beautiful. The south field slept under its frost, and the ranch went into its winter rhythms, the heavier feeding, the water maintenance, the mending of gear and equipment that the busy seasons never quite allowed. Delia had written to the Austin Land Office in November to request an extended assignment, with the provision that she was working on comprehensive documentation of water rights and boundary surveys for the larger Lockhart property, and the office had approved it with what she suspected was some degree of confusion, but no particular resistance, partly because her work record was impeccable, and partly because the Comanche County Land Office had put in a word on her behalf. She was aware that her situation had changed in ways that her professional life had not quite caught up with. She was no longer simply a surveyor on an extended assignment. She was a woman who had told a man she was in love with him, and who was staying in that man's home through the winter, and she did not particularly care what conclusions people drew from that, but she was aware of the social arithmetic of it in a place like Millhaven. She was a woman who had spent 6 years in a profession that required her to be above reproach, because any whisper of impropriety would have been used against her by the men who were looking for reasons to dismiss her work. She could not dismiss that calculus now simply because she was in love. Clarence understood this without her having to explain it at great length. He was not a man who needed things explained at great length. One evening in mid-December, sitting by the fire after dinner with the wind picking up outside, he set down the harness he had been mending and looked at her across the room. "I would like to marry you," he said. She looked up from the survey notes she was writing. "That is the most unadorned proposal I have ever heard described," she said. "I could elaborate," he said, "but I thought you preferred precision." She set down her pencil. "Is this also a precise request?" "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. There were things she was thinking about, things that needed to be said. "I need you to understand something," she said. "If I marry, I do not intend to stop working. The surveying is not something I am willing to set aside because it is inconvenient to the conventional idea of what a wife does. It is what I am. It is not negotiable. I would not ask you to stop, he said, without any particular deliberation, just stating the obvious. Why would I ask you to stop? You are extraordinary at what you do. She studied his face for a sign of performance, of saying what she wanted to hear as a tactic. There was none. He meant it with the same unadorned directness with which he had said everything else. And if the assignments take me away from the property sometimes, she said, as they will. I know what it is to love someone capable of their own life, he said. Meredith had her own life. She had her knowledge and her opinions and her plans, and she was fully herself. I did not love her despite that. I loved her because of it. He paused. I believe I am the same kind of man about it now. Delia Covington set down her survey notes and looked at this man who had just done something that very few people in her life had managed to do, which was to see her clearly and choose what he saw. Deliberately, knowingly, with full information. Yes, she said, I will marry you. They were married in January, in Millhaven, at the small Methodist church on the main street, with the minister and Billy Tate, and a handful of neighbors as witnesses. She wore a dark green dress she had bought from the dry goods store in town, which was not traditional but suited her better than white would have. And he wore his good black suit, and looked at her through the entire ceremony with an expression that was so utterly concentrated on her that she felt it like a physical warmth. There was a small supper afterward at the church hall. The neighbors were curious in the way that neighbors always are, and she navigated their questions with the same competent directness she brought to everything. And she noticed that Clarence stayed close beside her through all of it, not protectively, not possessively, just present, the way you are present next to something you value. When they got back to the ranch that night, the south field was invisible in the dark, dormant under its cold, waiting. The winter was long and quiet and deeply good. She had not had a winter that she wanted to slow down before. She had always moved through time impatiently, always had the next assignment, the next county, the next calculation ahead of her. This winter she found herself wanting to linger in the mornings, in the evenings, in the particular quality of light that came through the kitchen window at midday when the sun was low and golden. She was still working, still documenting the water rights and the grazing boundaries, still writing detailed reports with the precision that was simply how she thought. But the work had a different frame around it now. Clarence was a revelation in close quarters. He was not, as she had first assessed him, a simple man. He was a private man, which had made him look simple at a distance, because privacy can look like blankness from far enough away. Up close, she discovered that he had been reading widely all his life, that he had opinions about things that surprised her with their subtlety, that he had a specific, dry, very quiet humor that she kept catching herself laughing at unexpectedly. He was endlessly patient with physical problems, the kind of patience that comes from understanding that most physical problems have solutions if you approach them with enough attention and refuse to panic. He was not patient with dishonesty or with cruelty, which she saw demonstrated twice in the winter, once with a horse trader who came through, and once with a man in town who said something dismissive about the survey work she had done on the Reardon boundary. Both times Clarence addressed the situation with a direct economy that she found, to her own private amusement, somewhat thrilling. February brought the first tentative signs from the south field. She went down to the fence line on a warm morning near the end of the month when the sun was strong and the air had the particular thin sweetness of almost spring, and she saw the wheat beginning to stir in the dormancy break, the first pale new growth pushing from the crowns. She did not go to find Clarence. She waited until evening, and then at dinner she said, "The wheat is waking up." He looked up from his plate. "Go look tomorrow morning," she said. "Early, when the light comes across at an angle." "You'll see it," he did. She heard him come back into the house while she was still drinking her first coffee, and when he appeared in the kitchen his face had that expression again, the one she had seen the morning the seedlings came up, the one that was grief transmuted into something else through the alchemy of time and green and growth. "Come," he said. They went together. the south field in the early spring light beginning its comeback. She stood beside him at the fence and felt the warmth of him and the warmth of the sun and the particular satisfaction of having been right about something that mattered. "She was right about this field," he said. "She was. And you were right to plant it." "Yes," she said simply, because she had learned that this man appreciated directness. He turned and kissed her in the early morning light by the Southfield fence, his hands on her face with the same gentleness he used with things he was careful about, and she kissed him back with all the directness she brought to everything, and the Southfield grew quietly behind them. Spring arrived in full measure and brought with it the vivid green of established wheat in its heading stage. The Southfield transformed into something that rippled in the wind like a living thing, something that breathed. She had other survey work in March and early April, 2 shorter assignments in neighboring counties that she rode out for and came back from, and each time she returned to the Lockhart ranch, she was newly aware of the particular quality of what she was returning to, the warmth that expanded in her chest when the ranch came into view over the last hill. And then one morning in April she woke before dawn with a certainty that she sat with for a while before she got up, examining it the way she examined survey data, checking it against what she knew, running the calculations. When she was sure, she told Clarence. She told him at the Southfield fence because it seemed like the right place. She told him straightforwardly in plain language because she did not have another mode and did not particularly want one. He was very still for a moment. Then he turned and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something wide open and fully unguarded, something that had no careful calculation in it at all. "Truly," he said. "I would not say so if I were not certain," she said. "November, I think, maybe late October." He took her hands in his. His hands were shaking very slightly. "Are you?" he started. "I'm fine," she said. "I am very well. I am going to keep working for as long as it's practical to keep working, and I will need you to understand that." "Yes," he said. "Of course, whatever you need." She looked at him. "And I need you to be as straightforwardly happy about this as your face is currently suggesting that you are, without feeling that you have to be careful about it in front of me." He laughed. It was a full, real laugh, the kind that comes from the chest and has no performance in it, and she had not heard him laugh like that before, and it was the best sound she had heard in Texas. "I am very happy," he said. "I am so happy I do not know what to do with myself." "You could start by checking the wheat," she said. "It needs to be walked." He laughed again, and she felt the warmth of it move through her like the spring. The Southfield was harvested in June. They borrowed a thrashing machine from the alderman's 2 properties over, the same family who had lent one to the Lockharts in 1875, and Clarence had a conversation with old Henry Alderman before the harvest that she was not present for but that she suspected touched on some of the weight of it, on what it meant to be running this machine through this field again. Henry Alderman had been at their wedding. He was a man who understood the landscape of things. The harvest took 3 days with 6 people working. She directed the logistics of it, the sequencing, the thrashing management, the grain storage, with the same precision she brought to everything. She was 5 months along by then, and moving with the slight careful adjustment of someone who has had to recalibrate their sense of their own center. But she was not slowing down except where slowing down was genuinely necessary, and she would tell you which situations those were herself. Thank you. She did not need assistance determining them. Clarence watched her work and did not try to slow her down or redirect her, which she appreciated enormously. When she needed something reached, she told him, and he reached it. When she needed someone to carry something heavy, she told him, and he carried it. He was good at being useful without being managing. On the last evening of the harvest, after the grain was stored and the aldermans had gone home and the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, she and Clarence walked the south field together in the fading light, the stubble golden in the low sun. The field was open and wide, and had the stripped, honest look of something that has given everything it had. 43 bushels per acre, she said, which is exceptional for a first-year planting on previously fallow ground. Meredith would have been pleased, he said. She would have wanted to know the exact methodology, Delia said, to replicate it. She would have, he said. She was meticulous. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, through the stubble, the evening settling around them. I want to plant it again in October, she said. Yes, he said, and every October after that. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him and looked up at him, and in the low golden light his face had the look it had taken on since spring, the look of a man who has come back from a long way away and found that the country he returned to was better than the one he remembered leaving. Every October, he said. Yes. She took his hand and they walked back toward the house together through the harvested field, through the long summer evening, through everything the next years were going to hold. October came and they planted the field again, and this time they planted it together with their hands both on the seed drill, working the rows through the deep loam in the amber light of autumn. She was 8 months along by then and had argued with herself about the physical wisdom of it, and decided that planting seed on prepared ground was within the range of the reasonable, and if it was not she would stop, which she did not need to do. Their son was born in late October, on a cold, clear night with the stars very bright, and the south field green with new wheat, the first green of the young crop catching the moonlight outside the window. The doctor from Millhaven was there, and everything went well, and she was through it with the same focused determination she brought to everything difficult. And at the end of it, she was holding a baby boy who looked at her with the slightly outraged expression of someone who has just arrived somewhere unexpected. Clarence was beside her holding her hand, and he was, she noted with private satisfaction, crying, which he made absolutely no attempt to hide or explain, and she loved him for that with a ferocity that she had not known she was capable of. He's going to need a name, she said. James, Clarence said without any deliberation. After your father. She looked at him. She had told him about her father in one of those long winter evenings, about the man who had taught her how to read the land and believed without qualification that what she learned would be hers to use. She had not said, "Please name our children for him." She had not said it was what she wanted. He had simply been listening, the whole time, with the completeness she had come to understand was just how he listened. James, she said. Yes. James Lockhart was a healthy, loud, opinionated baby who slept in patterns that bore no relationship to conventional schedules and who had strong views about food and temperature that he communicated with impressive vigor. Delia navigated early motherhood with the same pragmatic intelligence she applied to survey work, reading everything available on infant care, testing approaches with empirical patience, and accepting help from Clarence, who turned out to be remarkably capable with the baby. With the same direct ease she accepted everything useful. She was back at her survey work by spring, first the short assignments close to home, then the longer ones as James grew sturdier and Clarence and the housekeeper, a capable woman named Alma who had come from Millhaven in the fall and who was worth considerably more than her wage, managed the household between them. Delia's work with the Austin Land Office had become something of a landmark case by 1879 and into 1880, her Comanche County water rights documentation being cited in 2 separate legal proceedings as the definitive survey of record. She wrote a paper on composite survey methodology for clay-heavy soils that was eventually published in a land management journal out of Houston, which produced a letter from the editor expressing surprise at the author's identity, and a curt reply from Delia that expressed her own surprise at his surprise, and suggested he read the methodology section again if he had any remaining doubts about its validity. Clarence read the published paper and told her it was the best thing he had read since a book on cattle breeding he had found particularly illuminating, which was, she understood, the highest compliment in his vocabulary. The south field was planted every October. It became a rhythm of the ranch, a fixed point in the year around which other things organized themselves. The yield was extraordinary, year after year, because the soil was what it was, and she knew what she was doing, and they took care of the ground the way you take care of something that matters to you. The winter wheat became a significant part of the Lockhart operation, eventually accounting for a third of the ranch's income, and making the cattle side less vulnerable to the brutal price swings that hit beef markets through the early 1880s. In the fall of 1880, a man from the County Land Commission came to the ranch with a dark expression and a piece of paper and told Clarence that there was a claim against the Northeast Water Right, a claim filed by a property syndicate out of San Antonio that was acquiring land and water rights across central Texas in a pattern that was becoming a source of considerable alarm to smaller landowners. The claim was aggressive and technically detailed and obviously prepared by someone who knew what they were doing. Clarence handed it to Delia. She read it twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long moment with the same expression she wore when she was running calculations that she suspected were going to produce an uncomfortable result. "This is based on a misreading of the 1862 Water Compact," she said. "A deliberate misreading, I think. Someone has taken a phrase that refers to seasonal riparian rights and applied it to permanent water access, which is not what the language supports when you read it in the context of the full document. Can you prove that?" Clarence said. "I need to see the original compact," she said. "Not the copies, the original, which should be at the county recorder's office, and I need to cross-reference it against the survey of record from 1862, which I already have in my files because I requested it when I was doing the water rights documentation." She was already moving toward her study, the small room she had converted from the storage space she had first been given. "Give me a week." She gave it 3 days. What she produced at the end of 3 days was a 30-page technical analysis of the 1862 Water Compact, the subsequent survey records, the chain of property transfers through which the current claim was being made, and the specific ways in which the syndicate's legal argument misrepresented the applicable documents. She also identified in the process that the same misreading had been applied in 3 other claims the syndicate had filed in neighboring counties, which meant that her analysis, if presented properly, could challenge all 4 claims simultaneously. She wrote it in the precise, unflinching language of someone who has spent years making arguments that have to be airtight because they will be challenged by people with more institutional power and fewer actual facts. The case went to a county hearing. She was asked to present her findings. She stood in the hearing room, which was the same kind of room she had stood in before, full of the same kind of skepticism wearing different coats, and she presented her analysis with the same composed, absolute certainty she always had. The syndicate's attorney attempted twice to question her credentials, and both times she redirected the conversation to the documents with a patience that was clearly, to any attentive observer, the patience of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how it ends. The claim was dismissed. All 4 claims in the end were dismissed. The syndicate's attorney went back to San Antonio, and the Lockhart water rights remained intact, and the 3 neighboring properties who had also been threatened sent their thanks in the form of a very good ham and a letter that was both grateful and respectful. Clarence was in the hearing room for all of it. She had not asked him to be there because she did not need moral support, but he was there. Afterward, walking back to where the horses were tied, he said, "I've never seen anyone do that before." "Do what?" she said. "Make a room full of stubborn men look quietly foolish without ever once raising your voice." She considered that. "It's easier when you're right," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't. Being right doesn't prevent most people from being drowned out. You have a gift for something else. You make rightness undeniable. You arrange the facts so completely that there's nowhere for the wrongness to hide." She looked at him. He was completely serious, looking at her with that direct, fully attending expression. "I have been practicing for 6 years, she said. "I know," he said. "It shows." He reached over and took her hand as they walked. "You are remarkable, Delia." She did not deflect it or minimize it because she had been learning in the years of this marriage to accept recognition from a person who offered it without calculation. "Thank you," she said. "You're not so ordinary yourself." He smiled. "High praise," he said. The years passed in the way that good years do, with a fullness that does not lend itself to summary, but that accumulates in small things. The south field was planted every October and harvested every June. James Lockhart grew from a loud, opinionated baby into a loud, opinionated toddler who had strong feelings about horses and showed, by the age of 3, a troubling willingness to climb anything that presented itself as climbable. In 1882, a second child arrived. A girl this time, born in April with the spring green on everything, who was given the name Clara after Clarence's mother, and who had, from her first days, her mother's complete and total focus and her father's quietness, a combination that would prove, in the years ahead, extremely effective. The Lockhart Ranch became known in Comanche County through the early 1880s as a particular kind of operation, not the largest, not the wealthiest, but one of the most intelligently run. The combination of Clarence's ranching instincts and Delia's analytical precision produced decisions that were consistently well-reasoned and well-documented, and the water rights battle had given them a reputation for not being pushed around, which in the Texas Hill Country in the 1880s was a reputation worth more than most. Neighboring ranchers came to Clarence with questions about grazing and cattle management. Neighboring landowners came to Delia with questions about their surveys and their water rights, and sometimes just with documents they wanted someone reliable to read. She helped when she could and directed them to the county office when she couldn't, and charged a fair rate for her professional time, which she kept meticulous records of. The Austin Land Office continued to call on her for major survey assignments through the decade. She developed a particular specialty in water rights surveying, which became increasingly critical as Central Texas development accelerated, and the question of who owned what water became increasingly consequential. She was not the most famous surveyor in Texas, but among the people who did this work seriously, she was widely regarded as the most methodologically rigorous, and that reputation had been built entirely on the foundation of the work itself, which was the only foundation she had ever been interested in. In the summer of 1883, on a June evening after the south field had been harvested, she and Clarence sat on the porch with the long light going golden over the property, and James, at 5 years old, running patterns in the yard that bore the hallmark of a child who has had a specific complex game explained to him by his imagination and is now executing it with total commitment. Clara, 14 months, was asleep inside. Delia was looking at the south field, the harvested stubble gold in the evening light. Clarence was looking at her. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking about the yield differential," she said. "The southeastern quadrant has been running about 8% lower than the rest of the field for the last 2 seasons. I want to do a soil analysis this fall before we plant. I think the drainage gradient may have shifted." He was quiet for a moment. "That's what you're thinking about." She looked at him. "Is there something wrong with that?" "Absolutely nothing," he said, and there was warmth in it. "I just want to know what else you're thinking about." She looked back at the field and then back at him and decided to be honest, which was, after all, the only mode she had. "I am thinking about how good this is," she said, "which feels like something I should not say out loud because good things are fragile." "They are not so fragile as you think," he said. "You know that from experience," she said carefully. "I know that from experience," he agreed. "I know that grief is real, and I know that loss is permanent, and I also know that life is larger than its worst moments. Meredith taught me that. Being alive teaches you that, if you pay attention." He reached over and took her hand where it rested on the porch rail. "You taught me that." She turned her hand and held his. "I am glad I asked about the south field," she said. "So am I," he said. "You were right to ask. You are usually right." "Always," she said, and he laughed. James in the yard announced something important to his invisible audience and executed a maneuver that involved both arms and most of his momentum. Clara inside was quiet. The south field lay open and harvested under the evening sky. In 1884, they planted the south field for the 7th time. They did it together on an October morning, the way they always did, both of them working the ground in the early autumn chill. James was 6 and wanted to help, and was given a small specific task, guiding the measurement string for one of the outer rows, which he took extremely seriously. Clara, at 2.5, watched from her father's back where she had been installed in a carrying arrangement of her own design, and was offering commentary on the proceedings in the emphatic and only partially decipherable language of a person, for whom articulation is still a work in progress. Delia stood at the end of a finished row and looked at the whole scene, the open field and the planted ground and her family in it. She thought about September of 1878, when she had ridden up the track on her spotted mare with her theodolite and her satchel and her letter from the county office, looking at the property of a stranger with the assessing eye she gave everything. She had been 30 years old and certain of her competence and uncertain of everything else. She had looked at the south field that first week and seen good ground going to waste, and she had waited for the right moment, and she had asked. She had not known, when she asked, that she was asking for all of this. She had not been that prescient. She had asked because the soil was good, and because the field had a padlock on it that no well-maintained property needed, and because she was someone who recognized grief masquerading as neglect and found it intolerable to walk past it without doing something. She had asked about the field, and he had said yes before he knew why, and neither of them had known, standing at that fence in the October morning, that yes was the first word of everything that followed. Clarence looked across the field at her, and their eyes met, and he tilted his head slightly to ask the question he always asked with that particular gesture, which was simply, "Are you all right?" And she answered it the way she always answered it when the answer was what it was right now, by smiling at him with the full directness she brought to everything. He smiled back. James, who had his father's quietness beginning to develop underneath his mother's intensity, continued to guide his string with perfect concentration. Clara offered additional commentary. The seed went into the ground in straight, true rows through the deep loam of the south field, and Delia Covington Lockhart stood in the October sun and watched it and thought, "This is the best ground I have ever seen," and she was right. By the fall of 1886, the south field had been planted 9 consecutive years, and the Lockhart operation had expanded carefully. 2 additional water rights documented and secured, a lease arrangement on the north grazing established on terms favorable enough to represent a small legal landmark in Comanche County water law. James was 8 and had inherited both his mother's analytical mind and his father's physical ease, and was already showing signs of wanting to learn the survey work, which Delia was teaching him in the same way her father had taught her, because a useful skill is a useful skill regardless of who holds it. Clara was 4 and had the specific kind of determination that makes adults slightly nervous about the future. Delia took a major survey assignment in the spring of 1887, a comprehensive water rights survey of the Upper Lampasas watershed that had implications for 6 different counties. It was the most significant single assignment of her career, and she approached it with the complete focus she always gave to important work, riding out for stretches of 2 and 3 weeks, working the field with her instruments in the January cold and the spring mud and the early summer heat, producing documentation of such thorough precision that it was eventually submitted to the state legislature as evidence in a water rights dispute that had been unresolved for a decade. She came home from the final leg of the watershed survey in July 1887 to find Clarence waiting at the fence where the track came in from the main road, which he did not normally do. She rode up and stopped. "What is it?" She said, "Nothing bad," he said quickly. James and Clara are both well, everyone is fine. Then why are you at the fence looking like that? I've been looking at something for a while, he said, and I wanted you to see it before I convinced myself I had imagined it. He walked her horse through the gate and down the track and around the south slope, and when she came to the south field fence and looked at it, she saw what he meant immediately. The late summer field was not planted. It was fallow at this time of year as it was every summer, but along the entire eastern edge, in a line that ran from the creek end to the ridge end, the native grass had given way to a growth of wildflowers, a dense, extraordinary carpet of them, Indian paintbrush and prairie coneflower and black-eyed Susan and bluebonnet going to summer seed, a solid band of color along the field's edge. They weren't there in the spring, Clarence said. I know every inch of this field, and they weren't there in the spring. They came in June, all at once, like someone had just decided. She sat on her horse looking at them. The light was the particular thick gold of a Texas July evening, and the flowers were vivid in it. It's the soil disturbance, she said quietly. 9 years of turning the field edge has created a seed bank in that border strip. The conditions were right this year, and they all came up at once. I know that, he said. That's the explanation, but it looks like something decided, she said. Yes. She dismounted and walked to the fence and looked at the flowers for a long moment. She thought about Meredith, who had been 24 years old and had known wheat when she saw it, and had not lived to see this field planted twice. She thought about a padlock on a gate and 3 years of grief, and a woman who had arrived with a theodolite and a question. Meredith would have loved them, she said. She would have known all their names, Clarence said. I know most of them, Delia said. He came to stand beside her at the fence, and they looked at the flowers together in the evening light. I have been so lucky, he said, and his voice had the texture of something that had been turned over and examined and set down with care. Twice. Which is more than a man can reasonably expect. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the flowers, but she could see his face and what was on it, the complexity of a good man holding multiple true things at once, gratitude and grief and love, which do not cancel each other out but exist together in the landscape of a life that has been lived with full attention. She put her hand through his arm. Keep expecting things, she said. That seems to be what works. He covered her hand with his. They stood at the south field fence in the golden July evening, and the flowers were vivid, and the field was full of waiting soil, and somewhere behind them, Clara was explaining something urgent to James, who was receiving it with the patient skepticism of a reasonably kind older sibling. They planted the south field in October, the 10th year. It came up green in November and went dormant in December and woke again in February in the warming. It grew through March and April in the heading stage, and Delia walked it in the morning sometimes alone, and sometimes with whoever was willing to be up early, often Clarence, sometimes James with his serious 8-year-old face. Once Clara, who fell asleep standing against her father's leg in the early morning, and was carried back to the house without ever fully waking. The harvest in June of 1888 was the best the south field had ever produced. 48 bushels per acre, extraordinary by any standard, the product of 10 years of intelligent farming of exceptional ground. Delia recorded it in the ranch ledger with her precise hand, and the number sat on the page with the satisfaction of something true. That evening, after the thrashing machine had gone back to the alderman's and the grain was in storage and the hands had been paid their harvest share and James and Clara were in bed, she and Clarence sat on the porch in the warm June night. 48 bushels, he said. The drainage correction made the difference, she said. The southeastern quadrant came up to match the rest. It did. He was quiet for a moment. Delia, yes. What would you say to a third child? She looked at him. He was looking at the south field, the harvested stubble white in the moonlight. He looked peaceful and strong and exactly like himself. I would say that 2 children is already a significant commitment of resources and time, she said. And then I would say that Clara is 4 and James is 8 and the timing is not terrible. That is a very analytical answer to the question. It is the accurate answer to the question, she said. The other answer is that yes, I think I would like that. He turned and looked at her with that full, attending directness she had been receiving for 9 years now and still found, each time, completely engaging. "Good," he said. Their third child, another boy, was born in March of 1889. They named him Robert after Clarence's father, and he arrived in the world with a quietness that was somewhat deceptive, as the family would learn over the subsequent years, because Robert Lockhart was one of those people who stores everything up in stillness and then produces it, complete and considered, at the precisely correct moment. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's broad shoulders in miniature, and from his earliest weeks, he watched the world around him with the calm attention of someone who has decided that the wisest initial position is observation. Delia recovered from Robert's birth with her usual practicality, and was back at her survey work in a modified capacity by May, doing local assignments that kept her close to home. The Austin Land Office had by this point formally designated her as Senior Survey Specialist for the Central Texas Water District, which was a title that had not existed before them having to figure out what to call someone with her combination of expertise and documented achievement. She received it with the equanimity she brought to most institutional recognitions, which was to note it, file it, and continue doing the work. The South Field was planted in October of 1889, the 11th year, with James now 9, and showing a genuine aptitude for the seed drill that made Delia quietly proud in a way she tried not to make too obvious because she did not want to push him in any particular direction, only to open doors. Clara at 5 was insistent on being involved in everything and had to be redirected 3 times per morning on average, which was, everyone agreed, about par. Robert observed the proceedings from his carrying arrangement on Clarence's back with the same calm attention he brought to all new experiences. In 1890, the Texas frontier had changed from the country it had been in 1878, when Delia had first ridden up the Lockhart track. The railroad had come closer. The telegraph lines ran through Millhaven now. The open range was being fenced in every direction as the cattle industry consolidated and the family farms pushed out from the towns. The Comanche County that Clarence had grown up in, the county that had still felt genuinely wild at its edges in the 1870s, was becoming something more settled, more mapped, more documented. She had done a good portion of the documenting, which was not nothing. There were things that did not change as the decade turned. The quality of the Southfield soil, which remained remarkable, the product of geology and the accumulated care of 11 years of good farming. The particular quality of the Lockhart partnership, which had been tested in several ways by the years and had emerged from each test more solid than before. The padlock had been off the Southfield gate since the morning she had said plant it and he had said yes, and it would never go back. In the spring of 1891, Delia received a letter from the Texas General Land Office in Austin. The letter was from the commissioner himself, a formal letter on heavy paper, offering her a position as the first woman survey commissioner for the state of Texas, a newly created position that would involve overseeing survey standards and methodology across all Texas counties, training surveyors, and serving as the senior technical authority on disputed survey questions at the state level. She read it twice at the kitchen table while Clarence was outside with the children. Then she read it again. Then she set it down and looked at the window. He came in from outside about 20 minutes later and found her sitting with the letter on the table in front of her and her hands folded on top of it. He looked at her face and got a cup of coffee and sat down across from her without saying anything. She slid the letter across to him. He read it. His face went through several things while he read it, things she was practiced enough at reading to follow. He set it down. Texas Survey Commissioner, he said. It would require time in Austin, she said. Significant time. The position is not a desk appointment. It requires travel across the state, investigations, oversight, training programs. I am not sure exactly what shape it would take, but I cannot imagine it would allow me to be home more than half the time. "No," he agreed. "And Robert is 2, she said. "James is 12 and Clara is 9, and they are old enough to manage my absence better than they were, but Robert is 2. "Robert is very capable for 2, Clarence said, which was true. "That is not the point." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He was looking at the letter, then he looked up at her. "What do you want to do?" She looked at him. This was the question she had been sitting with for 20 minutes. Not "can I do this," not "is it possible." He had skipped directly to "what do you want?" because that was how he thought about it, because he had never once in 13 years of marriage treated her desires as the variable that needed to justify itself. "I want to accept it," she said. "It is the most important survey position in the state, and there is no one better qualified to do it, and I have spent 11 years building the kind of record that makes this offer possible, and the work matters. The water rights work, the boundary documentation, all of it matters more if it is done to a standard that is enforced across the whole state." "Then you should accept it," he said. "It will change things here," she said. "Yes," he said. "And we'll manage the change." He said it simply, without drama, because it was simply true. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean, and he was not a man who held things he had promised as provisional. "You're sure?" she said. "I married someone who was already doing the most important survey work in Comanche County," he said. "I understood from the beginning that this was going to expand, not contract. I would be a poor kind of man to be surprised by it now." She looked at him for a long moment. "I will be home as much as I can," she said. "I know," he said. "And the children will grow up knowing that their mother does work that matters and that she comes home," he said. "That is a good thing for them to know." She picked up the letter. "There is also the South Field," she said. "The South Field can be managed," he said. "Billy knows the seeding protocol. You have it documented." "I do," she said. "I documented it in 1883. The corner of his mouth moved. Of course she had. Of course she had documented the seeding protocol. It was Delia Covington. She documented everything. She accepted the position. She wrote a precise, formal acceptance letter and sent it with the next mail out of Millhaven. Then she sat down with her children and explained it to them with the same directness she explained everything, which they received with varying degrees of comprehension, but with the general orientation of children who had grown up in a household where straightforwardness was the currency. James, at 12, asked specific questions about what the work involved and listened to the answers with close attention. Clara, at 9, asked whether she could come to Austin sometime and see the land office, which Delia said yes to without hesitation. Robert, at 2, was more interested in a piece of dried corn he had found than in the substance of the announcement, but received the general tone of it, which was that something important was happening, with appropriate gravity. She started the commissioner position in August of 1891. The first year was the hardest. The shape of the work was larger than she had anticipated, and the resistance from some of the county surveyors who did not appreciate being overseen by a woman was real, though not ultimately effective, because she had been managing that kind of resistance for 15 years now, and she had extremely good methodology for it. She brought the same unanswerable precision to the oversight role that she had brought to everything else, and within the first year, the resistance had largely converted to respect, not because anyone had decided to be gracious about it, but because the quality of the work made resistance unsustainable. She came home as often as she could, and each time she came home the ranch was exactly as it should be, running with the smooth competence of a well-built operation managed by a competent man. Clarence's letters arrived in Austin twice a week without fail, detailed, direct, informative, with the particular quality she had come to recognize as his voice on paper, a voice she would know anywhere now. She wrote back with equal regularity. The South Field was planted in October of 1891 without her, because she was in Austin completing the first quarterly survey standards review. Clarence wrote to tell her it had gone in straight, and the seedlings were up by the 3rd week of November, and she read the letter in her office at the General Land Office building, and felt something warm and complete in her chest. The field grew and was harvested in June of 1892, and she was home for the harvest. She was home with her sleeves rolled up, and her survey precision applied to the logistics, and Billy Tate shaking his head with affection at the commissioner of the state of Texas, running a thrashing operation with a clipboard and a clear directive, and James at 13 working, alongside his father with the ease of a boy who has found his ground, and Clara at 10 asking questions about every mechanical aspect of the thrashing machine that she could identify. Clarence found her at the end of the last day of harvest standing at the south field fence watching the stubble settle in the evening light, the same spot they had stood in so many times before. He came up beside her. 47 bushels, he said. The late spring was dry, she said. I'm not disappointed. The soil held it through. It always does. She leaned slightly against him, which was a small gesture but one she allowed herself because she had come to understand that small gestures between people who have built something together carry weight that grand ones cannot match. I was standing at this fence 12 years ago when you told me you loved me, he said. 13, she said. November 1878. 13 years. He was quiet for a moment. Are you happy, Delia? She looked at the field. The question was so direct and so genuine, which was how all his questions were. She thought about the honest answer which she owed him. Yes, she said, completely, unreservedly, in a way I did not know to anticipate when I rode up your track with a theodolite and a letter from the county office. Neither did I, he said. Though I should have suspected, she said, that a field this good was going to lead somewhere unexpected. He laughed, the full real laugh she still loved most. You suspected it before I did, he said. I usually do, she said. He put his arm around her shoulders and she put her arm around his waist, and they stood at the south field fence in the June evening, looking at the harvested ground, looking at everything that had grown there. The years that followed were good ones. Not without difficulty, because no years are without difficulty, and the Texas frontier of the 1890s offered its share. The droughts and the market crashes, and the political fights over land and water that Delia engaged in from her commissioner's position, with the same methodical ferocity she brought to everything. But the difficulty was managed with the resources of a partnership that had been tested enough times to know what it was made of. James Lockhart became, by his middle teens, a genuinely skilled surveyor in his own right, learning from his mother with the same total engagement with which she had learned from her father, and the two of them working together on field assignments when he was old enough was something Delia found so satisfying it was almost difficult to articulate, though she did articulate it, clearly and directly, to Clarence, who received it with the warmth he gave to everything she told him. Clara's interest in the thrashing machine had been the beginning of something larger. She turned out to have a mechanical aptitude that went beyond the Southfield harvest and well into the general question of how machines worked and could be improved. And by her early teens, she was reading engineering texts that Clarence ordered for her from Austin, with the same attention her mother gave to survey methodology. The future was going to have something interesting in it for Clara Lockhart, and all four of her family members knew it. Robert, the quiet one, the observer, grew into a boy who was indeed capable of producing, at the precisely correct moment, something that everyone else in the room had missed, which made him invaluable in conversations and formidable in arguments, and which Clarence said privately to Delia was exactly the kind of person you want on your side. In October of 1895, Delia Covington Lockhart planted the South Field for the 18th time. She was 47 years old and the commissioner of the Texas Survey, and one of the most respected figures in land management in the state, though she was also still, fundamentally, the woman with the theodolite and the satchel who could read soil by feel, and who had ridden up to a grieving rancher's gate one September morning in 1878 and changed everything. She worked the seed drill herself, with the precision of long practice, the rows coming out straight and true through the deep loam, the deep loam that had given back to every year of planting more than it had been asked to provide. Clarence worked beside her, and James, at 17, managed the horse team with calm competence. And Clara, at 15, was applying a methodology she had worked out herself for optimizing the row spacing that was demonstrably better than the one Delia had been using for years, which Delia acknowledged directly and without any qualification, because she had no patience for false modesty when someone produced good work. Robert, at 6, was in charge of the water jug and the lunch basket, and he executed these responsibilities with the same unhurried competence he brought to everything. When the field was done, they stood at the fence in the October afternoon, all 6 of them. The sky was the particular blue that Texas gets in October, high and clear and absolute. The south field lay planted behind them. The wheat would come up in November and sleep in December and wake in February and grow through the spring and be harvested in June, as it had been, as it would be. Clarence put his arm around Delia's shoulders, and she put her arm around his waist, and they looked at the field and then at each other. And what passed between them in that look was everything that does not require words, everything that has been built by years of working beside each other and arguing and laughing and being away and coming back and planting the same field 18 times and meaning it every time. "Same time next year," she said. "Same time next year," he said. The south field stretched open and waiting behind them, the seed in the dark ground, the roots finding their grip, the whole long possibility of another season beginning in the soil that had been Meredith's and was Delia's and was theirs and belonged, ultimately, to itself, and to the particular gifts it kept choosing to give to the people who trusted it with the question of what it wanted to grow. The gate stood open. It would stand open now for every season that followed. Not because the grief had been erased, because grief does not erase, but because the field had been given back to its purpose, and the purpose was life. And life, as Delia Covington had known from the moment she took that first handful of south field soil in her hand and read what it was, had never once needed their permission to be extraordinary. It only needed the gate to be open. And the gate was open.